So this talk is about anxiety and what anxiety is. Anxiety is a feeling of unease, worry, or nervousness. So anxiety is a big soup of feelings. It can normally be a combination of physical sensations, so kind of how our body feels, if we're sweating, if we're hot, our thoughts, are our thoughts racing, are we overthinking, and our feelings. Anxiety is a really normal feeling when things are stressful. So for example, if you had a presentation or an exam at school, it would be really normal to feel anxious before that and want to do well. Anxiety can become a difficulty. It can become a problem when it is a constant feeling or is generalised. So if somebody is feeling nervous almost all of the time, the anxiety comes from nowhere. And the anxiety lasts for weeks and months and interferes with day-to-day life, then this might not be normal. Sometimes the anxiety we feel can feel really intense or kind of disproportionate to the things that are going on. So there might not be an exact trigger. There might not be something like an exam or a presentation which starts our kind of feelings of nervousness and anxiety. When you feel stuck in that anxiety, it can make you feel really out of control and has a massive impact on your day-to-day activities and functions. So there are some different kind of signs of anxiety. I've split them into physical feelings, thoughts, and behaviours. And this can be really useful to go through with young people because often when we feel anxious, you can feel quite out of control and not know what's happening to your body. So some of the physical symptoms of anxiety are nausea and sickness. So this is a really common one with young people, particularly younger children. Those feelings of kind of sickness and saying they've got tummy ache or they've got yucky tummies are quite often involved in anxiety. They might feel very hot or sweaty, have sweaty palms, be taking short and shallow breaths, feeling shaky, so having kind of jelly legs or shaky hands, having trouble sleeping, having an upset stomach or needing to use the toilet more often than usual. Again, this is a really big one to kind of look out for with younger children and teenagers too, that sometimes they might not have the words to describe the feelings that are going on for them, but these physical symptoms like having a really upset stomach or being shaky and kind of having panic attacks can be at play. They might have difficulty concentrating, and that might be something that you notice at home or you're kind of getting fed back from school. So they might feel out of control and like their thoughts are racing and they cannot keep up with them. We talk a lot about kind of overthinking, and that's that feeling where your thoughts are almost going quicker than you can keep up with them. You might feel overwhelmed, feel on edge or panicked about what's going to happen, and feeling worried and kind of scared about your ability to cope with things. So you might feel as if things are very big and they're kind of out of your control and you can't get a handle on them. They might be very preoccupied with negative thoughts, so thinking of lots of what ifs, worrying a lot about the things that might happen in the future, worrying about not being able to cope, and that overthinking again. So thoughts racing and kind of thinking of the worst case scenarios and all the different obstacles that might come up, which may make them unable to cope. In terms of behaviour, these again are really big ones to look out for with young people. Often we kind of don't have the words to describe how we feel, but these behaviours and physical symptoms are obvious to kind of see from the outside a lot of the time and can be indicators that anxiety is going on. So withdrawing from social situations, that might be kind of not wanting to attend school, not going out with friends, pulling away from hobbies and things that they once enjoyed. Avoidance is a really big one in young people. So this can be different for every young person. For some people, it might be kind of tantrums or things like meltdowns, where there's lots of crying, lots of kind of stomping feet and things like that, which avoids the causer of the stress. It might be redirecting focus, so kind of deflecting from the things that are going on, making excuses and creating distractions. There might be reassurance-seeking behaviour, so that might be kind of a child being more needy or more kind of clingy than before. There might be school refusal, so not wanting to go into school, not kind of being able to pinpoint why. Problems with sleep, a change in appetite, which again links to those physical symptoms, feeling very tearful, Angry or irritable, again, is a really big one in young people that you can kind of notice often. Young people might be especially grumpy. My mum would say that when she used to take me to dancing competitions when I was a child, I would be incredibly nervous in the morning and I would be super, super grumpy all day until I danced, and then I'd be absolutely fine. So for me, the biggest kind of symptom and the biggest sign of my anxiety was being very irritable. Concentration, again, it's one that you might pick up at home, but also at school. So there's lots of different things that can cause feelings of anxiety in a child's life. Some of these are kind of situational factors, such as school or academic stress. So that might be in the lead up to exams, to A-levels, GCSEs. There might also be life events like bereavements and parents separating, moving house, changing school. They might be experiencing family stress. So if something particularly stressful is going on for the kind of adults in the house, this can feed into the interactions that you might have with young people. Or if you spend a lot of time around someone who is incredibly anxious, it's kind of picked up. They might be in environments or situations where they feel unsafe. So if they're experiencing bullying, harassment, or witnessing abuse, or experiencing that at home, or experiencing things such as discrimination and racism, they can be incredibly emotional experiences and can really increase the anxiety a young person feels. Not receiving the right support for their needs. So this is something which is incredibly relevant to those with neurodevelopmental disorders, whether they are diagnosed or undiagnosed. If a young person is not receiving the right support for their needs, then they can become very, very anxious. So throughout development and throughout a child going through school, there are different factors that can kind of influence how they feel. So around the time of year 6 to 7, a big kind of situational factor which impacts anxiety is the transition into secondary school. Everything that's kind of was once stable and secure about their day-to-day routine changes. They might have new teachers, new friends, and not know anybody around them. During year 8 and 9, there might be difficulties with friendships. Puberty is a really, really big one. So as well as kind of physically, there being changes to the body, there's also a lot of changes in terms of how young people identify themselves. There's a lot of changes to how they see themselves and their kind of sense of self. Also GCSE options are a big one here. Even though the kind of stress of the exams might have not have kicked in yet, thinking about the future can be quite nerve-wracking and can cause those feelings of anxiety. In year 10 and 11, academic stress and exams can be a big cause of anxiety. So revising all the time, homework, there is a lot of pressure, even if it's not something that's put on by kind of parents or anybody around them. A lot of young people want to do well, unsurprisingly, and that can play out into anxiety around their academics. Might also start to be some emerging kind of romantic relationships around this time, which can be a really anxious kind of situation for young people. It's all very new and they can be very up and down. There's also party culture and social difficulties. So these kind of friendships coming in again. Year 12 and 13, there is A-levels and managing the workload, and also the transition to university is an incredibly uncertain time. Friendships and relationships, again, they kind of play out throughout the entire development of a young person. So where does anxiety come from? So when you feel anxious, it's a feeling that can kind of often make you feel very out of control. And something that I find really helps with young people is talking a little bit about where anxiety comes from in the body and how the mechanisms work. So our brains haven't changed too much since we were cavemen and since we were in the Stone Age. And the mechanisms we developed to keep us safe back then still persist. The responses are still the same, but the threats have changed slightly, which can mean that sometimes in modern life, the responses to threats don't quite fit. In the brain, there is this little bit in the middle. So this is what I call our caveman brain. We have the amygdala and we have the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is the control center of the brain. I always think about kind of a big CCTV room with lots of different buttons. That's a little bit like what the hypothalamus does. The stress response helps us to deal with stresses and deal with anxieties in our kind of situations. The amygdala perceives a threat and it orders the hypothalamus to release hormones like adrenaline. Adrenaline triggers our sympathetic nervous system and this becomes activated. So this nervous system, it works faster than our thoughts and it helps to protect us from danger. So when we were cavemen, this worked really well because if there was a tiger or a woolly mammoth, we could kind of move out of the way before we even thought that we were going to get trampled on. It increases our heart rate, our airways relax and breathing increases to let in more oxygen. Digestion is slowed and muscles tense up and switch on. So this also impacts our internal muscles, which is why there can often be changes in bladder and bowel urgency. All of this comes out as 3 responses. There is the fight response, the flight response, and the freeze response. If we were a caveman and we were faced with a saber-toothed tiger, we could have 3 reactions which would help us to survive. The first one would be to fight. The second one would be to run, and the third one would be to hide. This would help to keep us alive really well if that's what the threat was. Nowadays, if the threat was a biology exam, these responses might not work so well. So how these reactions look in young people is slightly different to how they were kind of designed and developed back when we were cavemen. So the fight reaction might look like yelling, shouting, and kind of being aggressive or very angry. It might be physical violence, so hitting, kicking, biting. And then the kind of thoughts and emotional responses come in, so being kind of defiant or non-compliant, going towards the thing that feels threatening to them, and being very angry, kind of irritable, very defensive and perhaps aggressive. The flight response might look like wanting to escape or run away from the thing that's causing them stress. So this can play out as being unfocused or finding it difficult to pay attention. They might be very preoccupied or busy with everything but the other thing. Procrastinating and being avoidant are really big in the flight response. So when something is making a young person feel stressed and they are kind of ignoring what happens, that might be the flight response in play. They might come across as anxious, panicked, scared, worried, or overwhelmed and become quite withdrawn. The freeze response is the kind of mind shutting down. So you might physically see young people freeze. They might kind of not want to talk very much or say things like they don't know or they're not sure what's happening for them. They might want to hide, so kind of keep themselves away in their room, keep themselves away from friends, and be very zoned out. They might feel numb. So you hear quite a lot young people say that they feel numb or they feel kind of switched off to the things that are going on around them. And that is an example of the freeze response. So all 3 of these are very normal and very natural ways of responding to anxiety. Another activity that I like to look at with young people is the stress bucket. So we've talked a little bit about where anxiety comes from and the situational factors that might cause anxiety. And we've had a look at some of the mechanisms. What we want to try and identify with young people is what triggers their anxiety and what can we do to help them. So that might be self-management, it might be ways that you can support your child, or the way that school and other specialist services can help to support your child. So the stress bucket, if we imagine an empty bucket, as we can see on this page. So throughout the day, our bucket gets full of the different stresses going on in our life. So you might wake up and realise your homework is due. You might have fallen out with your friends over the weekend and have to go into school and face them. And you've been arguing with your dad this morning about burning the toast. Your granny is unwell behind all of this, and you've got exams next month. And to top it all off, you now can't find your tie. So very quickly, before you've even kind of got to school, your stress bucket is getting filled up and filled up with stress. What happens when the bucket gets filled is that it overflows. So how that looks is kind of tears, low mood, anger, academic difficulties, and all of those things that we spoke about just before. So the different ways that anxiety might play out. It might be the fight response. So somebody might be very irritable or aggressive. It might be the flight response. So they might kind of withdraw or deflect or avoid the things that are going on for them. Or it might be the freeze response, and they might be quite unresponsive or numb. What we can do to stop the bucket overflowing is add taps. So some of these taps can be helpful and some of them aren't so helpful. Some of the ones that aren't so helpful feed back into our bucket. So although they let out the stress in the short term, they feed back into it in the long term. Some examples of this are things like self-harm, avoidance, school refusal, and substance use. So in the short term, they really help us to manage our anxiety and they help us to manage our stress. But in the long term, they're not especially helpful. What we want to try and do and help young people to do is add taps to their bucket, which do help let their stress out without feeding back into it. So some of these could be using mindfulness, doing something which makes them feel good, or talking to friends and trusted adults. These taps are normally called coping strategies. So in the Wellbeing Centre, we try to develop something called a coping skills toolkit. As humans, we develop coping skills pretty automatically. It's the brain's way of helping us to manage the stresses and the anxieties in our life. Some of the ones we develop might not be so healthy. So they might be some of the ones that we saw on the bucket just then. So things like substance use, drinking a lot, going out to a lot of parties, self-harm, kind of avoiding the situation and never tackling what's going on for them. What we want to try and do is develop healthy ones which can replace these unhealthy coping skills. There are lots of different types of coping skills. What we want to try and do is think about and plan out some skills for all of the different sections. That way, when your young person or your children feel distressed or they feel anxious, they almost have a bit of a pick and mix of coping skills. So they can take a little bit out of one bit and a little bit out of another and hopefully find something that works for them. So self-soothing. When we are with children, so if a baby was to kind of come in the room right now and was feeling very distressed or upset, the first thing we would do is probably pick them up and get them a blanket or a bottle and ask them if they're okay and try to soothe them. The idea of self-soothing is we do that for ourselves. So this can be really useful if you've had an especially difficult day. If you know that a big trigger for anxiety is an exam, and the young person in your life has an exam coming up on Tuesday, you might plan to put some of these in place on the Tuesday evening or even the Monday evening to help them soothe themselves and manage their anxiety in the run-up to that trigger. So we can do this using the 5 senses. So the first one is touch. So that might be things you can physically feel. So blankets, pajamas, teddies, fluffy socks. It can also be about what you're wearing. So for example, I don't feel my comfiest in my work clothes, in my blazer, but I do feel really comfy in a hoodie or a dressing gown or my pajamas. There is sound. So for some people that is things like ASMR, white noise, kind of background music. It might be podcasts, audiobooks, or kind of music and playlists that young people like to listen to. There is sight. So for some people, that is views. So things like nature, kind of looking out the window, watching the birds. For other people, that might be looking at artwork, photographs, watching their favourite film or TV programme. And another important element of sight is the lighting. So for me, when I'm at home, I like to have kind of lamps on or fairy lights and create that really soft and warm lighting rather than having bright fluorescent light, which doesn't make me feel especially comforted. The next one is taste. So that might be your favourite food or things like a cup of tea or nostalgic flavours. So for me, when I'm feeling down, one of the things I always like to do is have a piece of toast that for some reason always makes me feel lots better. And your child might have things like a cup of tea or a hot chocolate, which help them to kind of calm down and soothe themselves a little bit. The last one is smell. So for some people that can be aromatherapy. So lavender is a big smell for anxiety. It's kind of very calming and soothing smell. You can get aromatherapy roll-ons, you can get reed diffusers, bath oils and things like that. Might also just be smells that smell good to you. So candles, body lotions, kind of having a shower and smelling fresh and clean. It might be your washing detergent or fabric softener. Another one for smell that can be quite important is nostalgic or kind of familiar smells. So when I was a child, I didn't especially like going to school. When I was in primary school, my dad used to give me the handkerchiefs out of his shirt pocket, and I used to smell those, which made me feel really comforted. So once we've kind of developed this toolkit of the 5 senses, you can use them to create a really nurturing and comforting environment. So when your child returns home from school, having had an exam and is feeling really nervous about how they might have done, you might create an environment where they put their favourite pyjamas on, they listen to an audiobook with a lava lamp and hot chocolate and a piece of toast. And putting that all together, it helps to create a really comforting environment which eases and kind of manages anxiety. The next one is distraction. So distraction is a really great coping skill for in the moment. We have to be quite careful with distraction because it very quickly becomes avoidance. So the idea of distraction is it's something that takes our mind away from the problem for a while. It's not something we use to kind of avoid something that's stressing us out or take us away from it forever. So some examples might be reading a book, watching a film or TV, spending time with friends or going out somewhere, cleaning, gardening, listening to music or a podcast, learning something new, baking something, or doing something you enjoy. What we want to try and do is distract ourselves so that we can process our feelings and then come back and deal with the issue. So for example, if I was revising for a biology test and I was finding it very stressful, I was kind of getting more and more worked up and feeling more and more anxious about what was happening, I might say, I'm going to go downstairs for a bit, I'm going to watch a TV programme for half an hour and have a cup of tea, and then I will come back to it when I'm feeling a little bit calmer. And that would be a really good use of distraction. It would become avoidance if I was doing my biology revision and I thought, this is really stressful, I'm just going to kind of turn it off and I'm going to look at my phone for the rest of the night. What we're trying to do is we're kind of trying to give ourselves some distance from the problem to process our feelings, not to numb the feeling or to never confront it. The next one is opposite action. So on the slide, you'll be able to see that there is a triangle. This is one of the most important parts of cognitive behavioural therapy. So this is called the cognitive triangle. And what it looks at is how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviours interact with each other. So cognitive behavioural therapy says that for every situation, we will have thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. What happens is they kind of interact with each other. So for example, if I had been asked by a teacher to do a presentation in front of the class, my first thought might be that I don't think I can do it. I am not very good at public speaking. I might feel very anxious. I might feel quite shameful. I might feel worried and fearful. And I might feel a little bit annoyed as well. The behaviours I might show are maybe withdrawing, trying to avoid it a little bit. Or I could go the other way and kind of overplan or think about it a lot, panic and kind of go into overdrive. And what happens is these behaviours, emotions and thoughts, they interact with each other. So we get sometimes stuck in a little bit of a cycle. What opposite action aims to do is to break down that cycle. So it says we can have our thoughts and we can have our feelings, but they don't have to impact our behaviour. So to do this, the first thing we need to do is identify the feeling that's at play. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to find the words for the feeling. With young people and even with adults, I use a feelings wheel. There is loads of these on Google if you have a look, but they help to give us the words to describe the feelings that are happening for us. So for example, if a situation arose and I identified that I was feeling anxiety, what my impulse would be is to probably avoid the thing or try to distract myself from the thing that was causing me stress. So if it was my biology exam and I was feeling very anxious about it, what my impulse would probably be would be to wait till the very last minute to start my revision, or not revise at all because it's too stressful to even think about. Opposite action says that we should take action. So how I go about this with young people is we identify what is the feeling, what is my impulse, and then what is the opposite of that. It's quite a difficult skill to learn, but it can be really, really helpful in slowing down our reaction time and looking at how our behaviours are influenced by our feelings and our thoughts. The next one is mindfulness. So mindfulness is very, very popular in pop culture at the moment. We see a lot about mindfulness colouring, about meditation and things like that. The idea of mindfulness is that we bring our attention to the present moment. So we think about what is happening for us right now and we bring our awareness to that. So that might be simply thinking about what we're feeling. What are the physical sensations that are happening in my body right now? And what do I feel emotionally? Just bringing your awareness to that and kind of noticing those things can really help you to be mindful. We might observe our thoughts, and that can help us understand how we get trapped in sometimes streams of thought, which aren't always the most helpful. So if you see the picture, there is a blue sky with some clouds in it. What mindfulness teaches us is that the blue sky is a constant thing. It's always around. Throughout the day, we have different clouds that come. We might have big black clouds, big grey clouds that are full of rain. We might have some small little wispy clouds that float away really quickly. When we see a cloud in the sky, we see it and we think, oh, a cloud. We don't have to kind of track that across the sky or do anything about it. Mindfulness suggests that we think about thoughts in the same way. So when a thought appears in our mind, we might think, okay, I think I might fail my biology test, but I don't have to do anything with that at the moment. I can just carry on with my revision, or I can carry on with whatever I'm doing in the moment. There are mindfulness activities. So there are, again, lots of these on Google. You can kind of search mindfulness meditation, mindfulness colouring, breathing exercises, which can be really, really useful, especially in moments of panic and high anxiety. In terms of grounding, a really useful one, and one that's quite easy to remember, is you can do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So in the moment, you think about 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, and you might pay attention to the really small things. So can you feel the watch on your wrist? Can you feel the socks on your feet? 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This helps to kind of put our feet back on the ground and remind us where we are in the moment. The next one is emotional awareness. So as I just said, sometimes it can be quite useful just being aware of what is going on for us and just identifying and expressing our feelings. So I'm a big advocate for journaling. It's something that I think is really important. It just sometimes helps to get our thoughts out of our brain and kind of onto paper without having to do anything too much about it. So you might buy yourself a nice book or buy your child a nice book and a new pen, and you can simply write down each day how you're feeling, what things are going on for you. Sometimes that might be almost a journal entry. It might be quite long. Sometimes it could just be a sentence about something that's happening. Mood tracking is kind of a branch off journaling. So it can be a slightly shorter way of doing it. There are some really good mood tracking apps where you can use multiple choice to simply select the feeling and the things that are going on throughout the day. What that helps us to do is it builds up a picture of how do our moods change throughout the month or throughout the year or throughout the week. So if you know that every third Tuesday when you have chemistry, you feel very anxious the day before and then very angry on the day of, you know that that's something that's impacting your well-being and you can learn to manage that. So you can use elements of CBT, so logging your thoughts, writing down what is my thought right now, and then maybe challenging that thought. Or you can use the cognitive triangle. So again, there's another picture on this slide, but looking at what is the situation, what are the thoughts I'm having, the emotions and the behaviours. There doesn't always have to be a solution to these things, but emotional awareness is about bringing our awareness and kind of our thoughts to what is going on for us in terms of our behaviours and emotions. You might identify physical sensations. So with younger children, sometimes I like to draw pictures of almost like gingerbread men, and we go through the body and we fill in how the different parts of the body feel. So when you're feeling anxious, how does your head feel? Does it feel very hot or very cold? How do our legs feel? Do they feel strong or do they feel shaky? How does our chest feel and our heart? How does our tummy feel? And this can help young people to identify what's happening for them when they feel anxious and give them a little bit of control back when they probably feel quite powerless in those moments of panic. It can also just be as simple as speaking to somebody about our feelings. As humans, we don't tend to do too much talking about our feelings. And even sometimes when we think we're talking about our feelings, we might not be. So it's a bit of a cliche thing, but it can be very useful to use I feel statements. So rather than saying I think, it can be useful to talk about I feel. There is a QR code on this slide which has got some suggestions for some wellbeing apps. So these can be really useful tools in terms of self-managing wellbeing issues, including anxiety. On the QR code, there is a list of links to lots of different apps. There are some for self-harm, some for CBT, some for eating, some for sleep. So there are lots of different things on there to have a look at and have a play with. It's a really simple way to kind of stay on top of our well-being and manage that ourselves. So how can you support your child with their anxiety? The first step is to reach out and talk to them. So I always think it's best to kind of talk about what's going on during a calm moment. Normally when you're feeling very anxious or you're feeling that panic, you do feel a little bit like you're wrapped in a tornado and you kind of can't get a grasp on your thoughts and what's going on. So sometimes it's better to talk about things in retrospect or during a calm moment when you notice anxiety is happening for your child. Talking can be really difficult for young people and it's probably not something they've done a lot. So you might have to try a few different methods. I always think a really great place to talk and have conversations that might be tricky is in the car. You're both kind of looking forward. You don't have that direct eye contact and pressure to speak, which can make it especially challenging to talk about our feelings. You might try looking away from them. So sometimes when young people come to see me, I will face the wall, just so they feel a little bit more comfortable talking and don't feel the kind of pressure of my eyes staring at them. You might also try drawing or writing. So for some people, it might be very difficult to talk about what's happening, but they're very happy to draw a picture which expresses it or write down their thoughts. For younger children, it might be best to draw something. So for example, a stick man or a gingerbread man, and label where the physical sensations are for them. This is because generally younger children don't always have the language to kind of express the feelings that they're experiencing. And doing that can help you to identify what is going on for them. For older children, they might draw mind maps or journal how they're feeling and then share those with you at a later time. The next thing to do is identify triggers. So in the earlier slides, when we looked at the stress bucket, that might be something that it's really useful to do. You might look at the different things that cause them stress throughout the day, what it kind of looked like when their stress bucket overflows, and then the taps that you can add to it to help them manage. You might keep a log or a bit of a mental note of moments where they feel anxious. So your child or young person might not recognise always that they're feeling anxious, and you might start to notice a pattern in their behaviour or their thoughts. All these things help them to kind of recognise when they feel anxious, and that's what's really important. It's really difficult to manage anxiety, and it's very difficult for young people to manage their well-being when they don't know what's happening to them, and it plays back into their feelings of nervousness and kind of feeling out of control. Another thing to do might be crisis planning. So for some young people and some children, their anxiety might become panic and fear very quickly. Sometimes it's useful to plan for that in advance. In those moments, you feel very out of control as a parent and as a child experiencing that, and being able to identify the kind of warning signs and have a plan in place for when those moments happen can be really useful. So there are lots and lots of these on Google and kind of templates if you look for crisis plans or mental health and safety plans. The good things to kind of have on them are warning signs. So what does it look like when anxiety first starts? What are the things that happen in the body? So does it start with a headache or a tummy ache or sweaty palms? What are the first behaviours that are indicative that anxiety is going on? So it might be that they suddenly become quite snappy, or that they start to withdraw and move away from things causing them stress. And you might talk about the feelings. So do they feel very sad? Do they become very tearful? Coping skills are another thing to plan in advance. So they help us to regulate our feelings. Distractions, again, are really, really effective for the short term. In moments of panic and in kind of moments of crisis, distractions are a brilliant way to kind of bring someone back into the moment and remind them that they're safe and that they're okay, even if that's just talking about what they did the weekend or what they're having for dinner. It can kind of remind them that they're in the room with you and that they're safe. It'd be useful to plan out in advance who you can speak to. So who are the support networks around your child and you? Are there kind of professionals you can speak to? Are there friends that they might feel comfortable speaking to? And other adults in their life, whether that be tutors or teachers or people like myself. You can look at emergency help, so places like the CAMS crisis, A&E, if your child's experiencing mental health crisis, or helplines. So I have got some of those linked at the end, but there are some really brilliant phone lines and text lines that can be used in these moments of panic or in crisis. And the final part is safety planning. So this is looking at how we can make the environment safer. And this is especially useful for young people that really struggle with unhealthy coping skills. So for example, if a young person is self-harming, can we remove the means to doing this? So that might be kind of locking cabinets or kind of being mindful of what they have access to within the home. It can also be looking at triggers. So we can't always avoid triggers or remove them, but it can be useful to look at how we manage our exposure to those triggers. So if you feel that anxiety has become a problem for your child, so it's very generalised and they're feeling it all of the time, and they might be experiencing these moments of crisis and moments of panic, if it feels like it's something that they cannot manage on their own and you cannot manage with them, then please reach out to professionals. So the first port of call is always the GP or a family doctor. Once you've kind of spoken to them, or when you're kind of planning to speak to them, it can be really useful to check in with their tutor or somebody like myself. There are also NHS mental health services. So CAMS is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, which you can self-refer to. So you can self-refer your child using an online form to get help through there, and that's something that GP can help with. There are also kind of private psychologists and private psychiatrists that can help. And there are lots of specialist services within Nottingham around lots of different parts of youth mental health and other situational factors that can help to manage the anxiety in your child's life. So there are some local services. So BU Knots, Base 51. Base 51 have a counselling service. They also do lots of kind of youth groups and additional things in the evening and different clubs. Harmless are a Nottingham-based organisation for young people impacted by self-harm and suicidal ideation. They have a crisis service for those who are kind of seen to be in suicidal crisis. And they have a service which works with those who have been impacted by suicide. So the families of those who have attempted or completed suicide. There is CAMS, which is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services in the NHS. There is a link to the Nottinghamshire self-referral form. However, if you search on Google or the internet, CAMS self-referral, and then wherever it is you live, there is usually a link that will come up that will allow you to do that. Again, the GP can refer your child to CAMS, so the GP is always a great place to start if you're unsure. There is First Steps, who do work around disordered eating and body image, which can be a massive cause of anxiety and a massive kind of coping strategy for anxiety in young people. First Steps are a really brilliant service because they don't use BMI or weight as part of their referral threshold, which CAMS do. So they can work with people at kind of whatever process and whatever stage of body image difficulties they're experiencing. There is Juno Women's Aid, which are based in Nottingham City, and they are a domestic abuse organisation. And there is an Amara, who again are Nottingham based and work with under 18s around sexual abuse. There are some specific mental health services, which I've popped on here as well. There are different phone lines and different apps. So Kooth is a really great service. There is an app where there is a 24/7 chat service that can be used by young people every day of the year if they're experiencing difficulties with their mental health and wellbeing. There are Samaritans, and there's also Shout, which is a text service, which can sometimes be more comfortable for people that might be struggling to kind of talk on the phone about how they're feeling. There is Childline, Papyrus, and there's the Muslim Youth Helpline too, who do some kind of culturally sensitive work with young people. There is a helpline for Beat, which again is an eating disorder service and helps with body image and disordered eating. And there is some specific services for LGBTQ plus students and young people as well. So Mermaids is for trans young people, and Switchboard have some kind of different LGBTQ services on there. So just before I finish, I wanted to kind of have a look at the Wellbeing Centre. So the Wellbeing Centre is a proactive space. So the idea is that we're going to be working with individuals and groups. I'm going to be doing some assemblies with young people and over at the junior school and some PHSE to kind of challenge the stigma and the taboo that comes with talking about mental health. I'm going to be working with students to create those toolkits. So looking at different coping skills, what strategies can we kind of put in place to support their well-being, looking at stress management techniques and self-care. I also do signposting and triage. So I'm kind of the first port of call when it comes to wellbeing. I will meet with the young person. We have a little bit of a chat about what's going well and maybe what's not going so well, and we can decide going forward what the best service is for them. For some people, it might be coming to see me for a couple of weeks and we do some work to support them with kind of managing the work-life balance, or it might be looking at stress management or anger or anxiety. For other people, they might be better suited to counselling or for specialist services outside of school, and we can help with referrals. There is physiotherapy available in the Wellbeing Centre. So Alex Lamb is our physio. He's in school between 1 and 5 on Wednesday. So students are able to book physio sessions during lesson time and after school. Students have to have parental permission to do this, and parents have to attend these sessions in person just for kind of chaperoning purposes. They're 40-minute sessions, which include assessment and treatment, and the cost of these sessions is £45. Parents are also welcome to book into these sessions as well as staff. If there is any questions about this, please contact the Wellbeing Centre. So Dan Scott, you can book to see the physio using the booking form for the Wellbeing Centre, which is also where you can book in to see me. This is a QR code for the booking form for the Wellbeing Centre. So if you follow this QR code, it will take you to a form. You can indicate on that form which service you want. So you can book in a session with me. You can book in a session with the physio, with the physical health lead, and the other services available in the Wellbeing Centre. Once I receive any inquiries for my support, I will email the young person and we can arrange a time that works for them to come and have a chat with me and decide on a support plan going forwards.